It was the kind of expedition every climber dreams of, a chance to conquer one of the highest peaks in the world, in the perilous and ever-challenging Himalayas. 4 experienced climbers, Ethan Harris, Lara Patel, Noah Carter, and Sophie Miller, had prepared for months, gathering supplies, making plans, and preparing themselves mentally for the journey ahead. Their mission: to climb the icy, treacherous summit of Mount Gan, a peak that had only been summited a handful of times due to its unpredictable weather and hazardous terrain. Ethan, the leader of the group, had been a seasoned mountaineer for over a decade. His passion for the mountains was unmatched, and his attention to detail was what made him one of the most respected in the climbing community. Lara, the quiet strategist, had joined Ethan on several expeditions. Her calm demeanor in the face of adversity made her invaluable. Noah, a geologist, brought his scientific knowledge of the terrain, helping the group navigate tricky areas. Finally, Sophie, an expert in survival tactics, was the one who kept the group alive in the harshest conditions. Their plan was simple: ascend Mount Gan, capture breathtaking footage, and return to base camp in less than 2 weeks. It was a routine climb for climbers of their caliber, but as they would soon find out, this climb would prove to be far from ordinary. The weather conditions in the Himalayas were notoriously unpredictable, but the group was confident. The first few days of the climb were uneventful. They scaled the lower reaches of the mountain without incident, the air thin but manageable. The further they ascended, the more they encountered the dangers that awaited them: ice storms, freezing temperatures, and treacherous crevasses that seemed to appear from nowhere. On the 6th day, everything changed. The group was halfway up the mountain, and their progress had been slower than expected due to the increasingly harsh conditions. They decided to set up camp for the night, hoping the storm would pass by morning. The wind howled through the crevices and the temperature dropped to dangerously low levels. As they huddled inside their tents, Ethan gathered the group to discuss their plans for the next day. But just as they began to settle in, Lara heard something, a faint whisper in the wind. At first, she dismissed it as the sound of the storm, but then it came again, clearer this time. She turned to the others, but they hadn't heard it. She stepped outside her tent, straining to listen over the howling wind. There it was again, almost like a distant voice calling her name. It sent a chill down her spine. "Did you hear that?" Lara asked, her voice shaking. The others exchanged confused glances. "Lara, it's just the wind," Noah said. "You're hearing things. Let's get some rest." But Lara wasn't so sure. There was something unsettling about the sound, something that felt wrong. She shook it off, returning to her tent, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something unseen in the dark mountain night. The next morning, they woke to find the storm had intensified. Snow blanketed the area, and visibility was almost non-existent. They decided to push on, hoping to make it to a safer location before the storm worsened. But as they trekked higher, the atmosphere became more oppressive. The wind seemed to grow stronger, the snow heavier. And then they came upon something they hadn't expected, something that would change everything. At the edge of a crevasse, hidden under a blanket of snow, they found a piece of equipment. It was an old, weathered rope tied off to a rock. At first, it seemed like just an abandoned piece of gear from a previous climber, but as they inspected it further, they noticed something strange. The rope had been cut. No climber would leave a rope like that behind, especially not one in such a dangerous area. "This doesn't make sense," Ethan muttered, running his fingers over the frayed edges of the rope. This rope wasn't just abandoned. It was severed deliberately. The discovery left the group unsettled. Who had been here before them, and why had they left this rope behind? It wasn't just an oversight, it was a message. They continued their ascent, but the atmosphere grew increasingly eerie. The mountain, once a place of challenge and adventure, now felt more like a prison, trapping them in its icy grip. Every step forward seemed to bring them closer to something they couldn't understand. And then it happened. Noah, who had been leading the group up the ridge, suddenly stopped in his tracks. His face went pale as he stared into the blinding snowstorm ahead. Look at that," he whispered. The others turned, following his gaze. At first they saw nothing but the swirling snow and ice. But then through the whiteout they saw it, a faint silhouette moving slowly through the storm. It was a figure, dressed in climbing gear, walking alone in the direction they had just come from. "Is that?" Sophie began, but her voice trailed off as the figure disappeared into the storm. Ethan felt his heart race. "There's no one else up here. We're the only team on this route. Who could that be?" The figure had vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the climbers in stunned silence. They knew they had to keep moving, but the presence of the figure lingered in their minds, a constant reminder that something was wrong. As they pressed forward, they were more cautious, every snap of a branch or rustle of the wind sending them into alert mode. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing hour, and just as they thought the worst of the storm was over, it hit them, the unmistakable feeling that they were not alone. The storm continued to rage, visibility remained near zero, and the cold seeped deeper into their bones. But it wasn't the weather that had them on edge, it was the feeling that someone was following them. But who? And why? Just as they set up camp again that night, Sophie let out a strangled scream. Her flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the snow. She had seen something, a figure in the distance barely visible through the storm. Someone, or something, was watching them. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "We're not alone up here," he muttered, his voice filled with dread. And with that, the storm outside intensified, and the wind howled louder than ever, drowning out their voices. The shadows seemed to stretch further, as if they were closing in on them, suffocating them. As the group huddled together, unsure of what was real and what was just the wind, a single thought gnawed at the back of their minds. Would they make it out alive? The storm howled outside the tents, its eerie whistle causing the fabric to vibrate as if it were alive, trying to claw its way inside. Inside the small, cold shelter, the four climbers huddled together, their breaths visible in the freezing air. The figure Sophie had seen, faint and elusive through the snowstorm, haunted them all. Who or what had been out there? Could it have been another team? Noah asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his usual calm demeanor. Maybe they took a different route. Impossible, Ethan replied, his voice firm but weary. We checked the maps. We're the only team on this route and no one's reported anything about other expeditions. Lara, who had been unusually silent, raised her hand, signaling for the others to listen. There was something in the air, something unnerving. The sound of the wind had changed. It was no longer just the howling gusts of a snowstorm. There was something else mixed in, whispers, faint and unintelligible, barely rising above the storm's roar. Lara's eyes widened. That's not the wind, she whispered. Do you hear it? It's someone talking. The others froze, straining their ears to catch the words amidst the blustering wind. But they couldn't make out anything specific, just the low murmurs, like distant voices trying to reach them. Enough of this, Ethan snapped. He stood up abruptly, his boots crunching against the snow-covered floor of the tent. We've got a job to do. Let's stick to the plan. We'll leave at first light, find the summit and get back to base camp. But even Ethan's words couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung thick in the air. They had come for an adventure, for a challenge, but now the mountain seemed more like a tomb than a test of strength. As they tried to settle back into their sleeping bags, the whispers continued to swirl outside, as if the mountain itself was alive, watching them. The light from their lantern flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the tent walls. Each one of them felt a creeping sense of unease, but none of them dared to speak it aloud. By the time the storm finally subsided, the landscape had transformed into a frozen wilderness. The snow lay thick and untouched, like the world had been wiped clean of any trace of life. It was a chilling sight, too quiet, too still. The climbers packed up quickly the next morning, their movements hurried, each one eager to leave the uncomfortable stillness of the camp behind. They bundled themselves up against the biting cold, securing their climbing gear as they prepared to continue the climb. But the mountain seemed to have other plans. As they made their way up the ridge, their progress was slow, the wind biting at their faces, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The temperature continued to plummet, and soon the group found themselves enveloped in a thick fog, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Stay close, Ethan ordered, his voice sharp. This is the worst visibility we've had. We need to stay together. But even as he spoke, a strange feeling began to take hold of the group. The sense of being watched was no longer a distant thought, it was now an undeniable presence, hanging over them like a dark cloud. Every time they glanced over their shoulders, they felt the cold weight of eyes on them. But when they turned around, there was nothing. Only the swirling snow and fog. As they rounded a sharp bend in the mountain, Noah stopped dead in his tracks. His face went pale and his eyes widened in disbelief. Ethan, he whispered hoarsely. Look at this. Ethan followed Noah's gaze and his blood ran cold. There, half buried in the snow, was another abandoned rope, exactly like the one they had found earlier, severed cleanly. But this time there was something different about it. The rope was tied around the edge of a steep cliff, as though someone had been trying to climb and had been stopped suddenly, forced to leave their equipment behind. What the hell? Lara muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a hesitant step toward the rope, but Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't touch it," he warned. "We don't know who left this or what happened here." But as Ethan said those words, something strange happened. The rope, once still, seemed to twitch almost as if it were alive. A chill ran down their spines as they stared at it, frozen in place. A gust of wind swept through the ridge, and for a brief moment the fog lifted, revealing a narrow path leading further up the mountain. And standing at the end of that path was the figure again. This time there was no mistaking it. It was tall, shrouded in black and standing perfectly still. Its shape was barely discernible in the fog, but the unmistakable outline of a climber's gear and equipment was visible. "Who is that?" Sophie asked, her voice shaking. Ethan's jaw clenched. "We need to move. Now." They scrambled to gather their things, trying to ignore the figure that was still standing in the distance, watching them. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. No one else should have been there. But the longer they looked, the more they felt the eerie certainty that this was not just another climber. Something else was happening on this mountain. They turned away, continuing their climb, but the figure remained at the edge of their vision, following them. Its presence was now undeniable, a weight on their shoulders that made the air thick with tension. It was almost as if the mountain itself had come alive, pulling them deeper into its icy heart. And then, as they reached a narrow pass between two rock walls, the ground beneath them gave way. Lara screamed as she lost her footing and tumbled toward the edge. Noah lunged forward, grabbing her arm just in time to pull her back to safety. But the screeching sound of cracking ice filled the air as the path they had been following began to crumble beneath them. They were trapped. And the figure, it was getting closer. The icy wind whipped through the narrow pass, carrying with it the sound of distant eerie whispers that seemed to come from deep within the mountain itself. The figure they had seen before, still standing motionless in the fog, had vanished. But the lingering sense of dread remained, suffocating, oppressive. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the mountain itself was alive and conspiring against them. "Ethan, we need to turn back," Sophie said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. She was shaking, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan shook his head, his mind racing. "We can't. We're too far in. We'll have to go forward." But the reality of their situation was dawning on him as well. The mountain was unforgiving. The path was narrowing, the snow growing deeper, and the cold biting through their clothing. They had no choice now but to press on and hope that they could make it to the summit, where they could hopefully find shelter from the storms and regroup. "No, Ethan," Lara interrupted, her voice tense. "Something is wrong here. We're not alone." Her words hung in the air, a heavy warning. The group fell silent, and for a moment, all they could hear was the wind and the sound of their labored breathing. The snow underfoot seemed to whisper, as if the mountain itself were trying to speak to them. But then another sound emerged, faint but unmistakable. It was the crunching of snow, slow and deliberate. Someone, or something, was following them. "Did you hear that?" Noah asked, his voice trembling. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "Yes. Stay close." They moved in a tight formation, their steps careful as they made their way up the ridge. But the sound kept getting closer, moving in time with their own footsteps, always just behind them. Every so often they would glance over their shoulders, but there was nothing there, just the swirling snow and fog. Yet the feeling of being pursued only intensified with each passing moment. Minutes turned into hours and the climb grew more treacherous. The air was thin, the wind fierce, and the snow was so deep that it threatened to pull them off balance with every step. But they pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. Suddenly Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in disbelief. There, just ahead of them, was a figure. It was tall, and its silhouette was clear against the white expanse of snow. The figure stood motionless, its face obscured by a dark hood, but it was unmistakably a climber. The same black gear. The same eerie presence. Who is that?" Lara whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know," Ethan answered, his words tight with dread. "But they weren't there a moment ago. We need to get out of here." Before anyone could respond, the figure turned, vanishing into the swirling fog. They all stood frozen, staring at the spot where it had stood just moments before. "We have to follow it," Sophie said, her voice shaky but firm. "Maybe they know the way out." No one argued. They moved cautiously, hesitant but driven by the hope that the figure might lead them to safety, or at least to some answers. The fog seemed to close in around them, thickening with every step they took. The path was treacherous, a maze of rock and ice, and with each turn the sense of danger grew. As they continued, the fog became so dense that they could barely see a few feet in front of them. The mountain was now a world of swirling white, a void of snow and ice that felt more like a nightmare than a reality. And then, just as they were beginning to lose all sense of direction, they saw something ahead, a flicker of movement in the mist. It was the figure again. This time it was closer. The climbers froze. The figure was standing at the edge of a deep crevasse, its back to them, seemingly unaware of their presence. The air grew colder, the wind howling as though warning them to stay away. "Do we go?" Noah asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. "No," Ethan said, his mind racing. "We don't know who or what that is. We need to keep moving." But it was too late. The figure, as if sensing their presence, turned slowly, its face still hidden beneath the dark hood. And then, with a sudden jerking motion, the figure stepped backward into the crevasse, disappearing without a trace. Lara screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the wind. Ethan rushed forward, but the ground beneath his feet gave way. With a horrible screech, he felt himself slipping, his fingers clawing at the icy ledge as he fell into the darkness below. "Ethan!" Sophie cried, her voice shrill with panic. Noah reached out to grab him, but Ethan was already gone, swallowed by the abyss. The world seemed to tilt as the others scrambled to find their footing, their hearts racing in their chests. Lara and Sophie clung to each other, their breaths shallow, their bodies frozen with terror. And then, just when they thought the horror couldn't get any worse, they heard it, the sound of someone else falling. It was faint at first, just a distant echo of boots scraping against rock, but then it grew louder, more urgent. The sound of something, or someone, scrambling toward them in the fog. "Who is it?" Lara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. There was no time to answer. Something moved in the mist, something fast, and it was heading straight for them. The air seemed to crackle with a new energy, as if the mountain itself was alive, breathing, waiting for them to make a mistake. The footsteps came closer. The fog thickened, pressing in like a suffocating blanket. The climbers stood frozen, hearts hammering in their chests as the silence of the Himalayas swallowed them whole. Their eyes scanned the shadows, but all they could make out were the twisted, frost-covered forms of rocks and ice. A strange noise, like the faint crunching of snow, echoed in the distance. Was it the wind or was someone, out there? "Did you hear that?" whispered Aisha, her voice barely audible above the howl of the wind. Sahil, the most experienced of the group, motioned for them to be quiet. His breath was visible in the frigid air, but his gaze remained locked on the dark expanse around them. "Stay close," he ordered, his tone laced with tension. The sound came again, sharper this time, closer. It was unmistakable. Footsteps. Someone was walking in the snow, but who? The thought sent a chill through Aisha's spine, and she glanced nervously at her companions. "We need to move," said Sahil, turning towards the narrow path ahead. "Now." With no time to waste, they started moving, the snow beneath their boots groaning with each step. But the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and eerily in sync with theirs, were following them, coming closer with every breath. Aisha's pulse quickened. "Sahil, what if it's someone else? A rescuer?" Sahil didn't respond. His jaw clenched and his pace quickened. The Himalayas were vast, impossibly so. They were far from the nearest base camp, and they hadn't seen a single soul since they began their ascent days ago. There was no way someone else should be up here. "Keep moving," Sahil repeated, his voice barely more than a growl. The wind howled louder, whipping snow and ice around them in a blinding blizzard. The visibility dropped to near zero as they pushed forward, their eyes squinting against the fury of the storm. But despite the worsening conditions, the footsteps never stopped. They were closing in on them. Aisha's breath came in ragged bursts as she tried to keep up, her body aching from exhaustion. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going, but something instinctive, told her that stopping wasn't an option. Not with whatever was following them in the dark. Suddenly, a sharp, eerie scream sliced through the air, cutting off Aisha's thoughts. It was a blood-curdling, high-pitched cry, like a wounded animal in agony. The sound echoed off the frozen walls of the mountainside, sending a wave of terror crashing through her veins. "What was that?" she gasped, her voice trembling. Sahil didn't answer. His eyes were wide, scanning the horizon frantically. He looked like a man on the edge of sanity, his face pale and drawn. "Just keep going," he ordered, though his voice was strained. He was trying to remain calm, but it was clear to Aisha that even he was starting to doubt their situation. The sound came again, a scream, unmistakably human. It seemed to be coming from higher up the mountain, above them, echoing down the rocky cliffs. Aisha's heart skipped a beat. What was up there? As the group climbed higher, the path became steeper and more treacherous. The snow deepened and the winds howled more fiercely, making every step a challenge. Every movement felt like it could be their last. "Come on," Sahil shouted, his voice cutting through the storm as he moved ahead with determination. He was almost running now, his figure a blur in the whiteness. But Aisha's legs felt like lead. She had to stop. She couldn't go on. "Sahil. Wait," she called out, but her words were swallowed by the storm. Her head spun, her chest tight with panic. The air was thinner up here and every breath was harder to take. She reached out to steady herself on the jagged rock beside her, only to feel a strange vibration beneath her hand. It was as if the mountain itself was alive. The sensation ran through her fingers, cold and strange. Then a shape appeared out of the mist, tall and indistinct, its features obscured by the swirling snow. Aisha froze. Her heart skipped. The figure was watching her. It didn't move. It just stood there, a dark silhouette against the white world. "Sahil," she screamed, but the words barely escaped her lips before the figure stepped forward. For a moment, Aisha thought she saw the faint outline of a face beneath the shadowed hood. But no, it couldn't be. The figure advanced slowly, its footfalls silent on the snow. Aisha's breath caught in her throat, and her body stiffened with fear. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the figure moved closer, and yet, there was no sound. No crunch of snow beneath its feet. It wasn't walking, it was gliding. Aisha reached for her pack, her fingers trembling as she fumbled for the radio, hoping against hope that the rescue team was nearby. But the radio was dead. There was no signal. The figure was almost upon her now, its dark cloak swirling around it like smoke. Aisha's mind raced. Should she run? Should she call out? But what if she was making a mistake? What if it wasn't a person at all? Just as the figure reached out to touch her arm, there was a sudden movement behind her. Sahil. He had come back for her. But when he reached her side, his face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror. "Run," he shouted. "Now." The figure's hand brushed against Aisha's shoulder, sending a jolt of cold through her body. Then everything went dark. The search for the missing climbers had entered its 6th week. In the icy wilderness of the Himalayas, hope was beginning to wane, yet something strange was afoot. The efforts of the search teams were still relentless, but every new discovery seemed to create more questions than answers. The air felt heavier with every passing hour. Captain Raghav, the leader of the search operations, had gathered his team around a hastily built campfire in the midst of a vast, open valley. The shadows of the mountains loomed ominously in the distance, their snow-covered peaks shrouded in mist. "We've been over this area several times," Raghav muttered, staring into the flames. "Yet we keep finding new signs, new clues that lead us deeper into the unknown." The night before, a group of local guides had discovered an old, abandoned rope ladder buried beneath a thick layer of snow at the base of one of the tallest cliffs in the region. The discovery was unexpected. It wasn't in any of the climbers' original routes, nor did it belong to any recent expeditions. The rope, still intact, looked aged as if it had been there for decades. But what made it all the more eerie was the strange symbol carved into the wood of the ladder. It was an ancient symbol, one that the local Sherpas called the Eye of the Mountain. The eye, they said, was a warning, an omen of things to come for those who dared to venture into the highest reaches of the Himalayas. "Could it be a sign?" asked Dr. Aisha, a local historian who had joined the search team, her voice heavy with curiosity. "A sign that we are looking in the wrong place? Or that there's more to this than meets the eye?" Captain Raghav didn't answer immediately. He had heard the stories. Stories of climbers who had disappeared under similar circumstances, never to be seen again. Some whispered of the mountain's mysterious forces, how it called to those who sought to conquer it, only to claim them forever. But he didn't believe in such things. He couldn't afford to. As much as the mountain's beauty filled him with awe, its power was undeniable. Every step forward was like a test of will. They had to find answers for the families of the climbers, for the legacy of the expedition itself. "Let's go back to the beginning," Raghav said firmly, his voice slicing through the quiet. The climbers were experts. Their disappearance wasn't an accident. Someone or something made them vanish. A chill seemed to run through the group as the fire crackled. Just then one of the younger guides, Ravi, came rushing in from the shadows. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Captain," Ravi gasped, "we found something. It's not possible, but we need to see it." Raghav exchanged a glance with Dr. Aisha before nodding. They all followed Ravi in silence, each step carrying them deeper into the treacherous mountains. As they moved along the narrow path, a sharp wind howled through the valley, sending waves of snow cascading down the steep cliffs. They reached a narrow crevice, its walls lined with jagged rocks. There, partially buried in the snow, lay something that made the hairs on the back of Raghav's neck stand on end. A tent. The sight of it was almost impossible to believe. It was one of the missing climbers' tents, completely intact as though it had been pitched only yesterday. The snow around it was undisturbed, yet there were fresh footprints leading away from the tent, disappearing into the dark, looming depths of the mountain. Raghav's breath caught in his throat. He knelt down, touching the fabric of the tent with trembling fingers. The air was eerily still as he examined the interior. Inside, everything was in perfect order. It was as if the climbers had simply vanished into thin air. The strangest thing, however, was the diary. Raghav opened it with careful hands, his heart racing. The last few entries were written in a frantic, hurried scrawl. They detailed their progress up the mountain, the excitement of reaching a new peak, and then, the sudden shift. One of the climbers, a Disappearance, had written about hearing strange whispers echoing across the mountains, even when no one else was near. Then there was talk of shadows moving in the snow, figures that appeared and disappeared at the edge of their sight. A Disappearance had mentioned an unsettling dream about being chased, but the dream felt real, as though something was watching them. The final entry read, "We've seen it. The eye. It's real and it knows we're here. We have to leave but we can't. We're being watched. It's coming for us." Raghav closed the diary, his hands shaking. The sense of dread had intensified. Something was not right here. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was something far darker. As they turned to leave, something caught Dr. Aisha's eye. A glimmer of movement in the distance. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Raghav's eyes scanned the mountainside, but there was nothing. Nothing but the endless snow and ice. "Probably just the wind," he muttered, though the nagging feeling at the back of his mind told him otherwise. Something or someone was watching them. Suddenly there was a loud crack, a rumble beneath their feet, and then, darkness. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the rumble echoed through the valley. Raghav's heart pounded in his chest as the world seemed to tilt sideways. The sharp crack of ice splitting through the frozen ground sent waves of terror through the group. "Everyone move!" Raghav shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. "Get to higher ground now." The search party scrambled to safety, climbing toward the nearest ridge, their hearts racing with fear. The ground beneath them groaned, a deep, guttural sound, like the mountain itself was alive. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. Then the avalanche hit. Snow and ice cascaded down the cliffside, engulfing the lower valley. The team barely managed to scramble up, watching helplessly as the massive wall of snow swallowed the campsite whole. The tent, the equipment, the footprints, all vanished beneath the relentless surge of white. Raghav felt the weight of helplessness press down on him. They had come so close to finding the truth, only for it to slip through their fingers once again. But as the snowstorm began to subside, something caught Raghav's eye, a faint outline against the blinding white landscape. "Over there," he shouted, pointing toward a lone figure standing at the edge of the ridge. Dr. Aisha squinted through the swirling snow and gasped. "Is that?" The figure was tall and thin, dressed in weathered mountaineering gear, the same gear worn by the missing climbers. But something wasn't right. The figure was still, unmoving, as though it had been there for an eternity. "Stay close," Raghav ordered, his voice urgent. "We need to find out who that is." They cautiously made their way toward the figure, the harsh winds whipping at their faces. With every step, the figure seemed to grow clearer, but the closer they got, the more unsettling it became. There was no movement, no sign of life. When they were within a few feet, Raghav's breath caught in his throat. The figure was one of the missing climbers, a Disappearance. But he wasn't alive. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a terrifying stare, and his face was a twisted mask of horror. "This is impossible," Dr. Aisha whispered, her voice trembling. "How is this even possible?" Raghav's mind raced. They had found a Disappearance, but this wasn't a rescue. This was something far worse. The body was completely frozen, like it had been trapped in time itself. There were no signs of injury, no sign of a struggle. It was as though he had simply stopped. But the strangest part was the expression frozen on his face. It was as if he had seen something that terrified him to the core. Raghav kneeled beside the body, his mind swirling with questions. Then something caught his eye, a small, folded piece of paper tucked into a Disappearance's jacket. He unfolded it carefully, his fingers stiff with cold. The paper was old, yellowed with time, but the ink was still legible. We were warned. The eye watches. We are being taken. A chill ran down Raghav's spine. The warning had come too late, and now, the mystery of the eye was closer than ever before. We need to get out of here now, Raghav said, his voice tight with urgency. This mountain, there's something on it, something we don't understand. The group moved quickly, their minds filled with the terrifying discovery. They were no longer just looking for answers. They were fighting to survive, to escape whatever force had claimed the climbers. As they made their way down the mountain, the strange unease that had plagued them since the beginning seemed to grow stronger. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow beneath their feet felt colder with each step. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the mountain itself was aware of their presence. By the time they reached the base of the mountain, the storm had subsided, but the sense of dread was still heavy in the air. Raghav looked back toward the summit, the silhouette of the mountain looming against the darkening sky. The mystery of the climber's disappearance, the eerie symbols, the warning of the eye, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. The Himalayas held secrets, and some of those secrets were meant to remain buried. As the team descended the last few hundred feet, Raghav's heart was heavy with the realization that they may never know what truly happened to the missing climbers. The mystery of the eye, the strange figure on the mountain, and the chilling diary entries would haunt him forever. But one thing was certain. Some stories were never meant to be uncovered. He stopped briefly, looking back one last time at the towering peaks of the Himalayas, before turning away. The disappearance of the climbers in the Himalayas remains unsolved, and perhaps some mysteries are better left untouched. We want to thank you for sticking with us through this haunting journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more gripping tales of mystery and suspense, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think happened to the climbers? Was there something on the mountain that claimed them? Share your theories. We love hearing from you. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.